The ultimatum, the stars beyond Neptune, burned cold and distant as Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the tactical display. In Earth Defense Command, holographic projection filled the entire operations room, showing the solar system in crystalline detail. Red markers clustered near the Kuiper belt, each one representing a Vraxian warship. There were hundreds of them. Sarah had served in the United Earth Navy for 32 years. She had seen border skirmishes with rogue mining cartels, negotiated tense standoffs over asteroid mining rights, and commanded relief operations during the Mars colony disaster, but she had never seen anything like this. No human had. The Vraxian Empire had arrived 6 hours ago, their fleet emerging from faster-than-light transit at the edge of human space. Their ships were massive, some stretching over 3 km in length, bristling with weapon arrays that Earth's best analysts could barely comprehend. They had not fired a single shot. They did not need to. Their presence alone spoke of overwhelming power. Lieutenant Marcus Webb approached Sarah with a data pad, his face pale. Admiral, the translation matrix has finished processing their transmission. You need to hear this. Sarah took the device and pressed play. A voice filled the room, synthesized by Earth's computers, but carrying an unmistakable tone of absolute authority. Primitive species of the third planet, I am War Master Kelroth of the Vraxian Empire. Your system now falls within the territorial expansion of our domain. You have demonstrated rudimentary space capability, but you lack the strength to resist incorporation. The voice paused, and Sarah felt every eye in the command center turned toward her. Around the room, officers stood frozen at their stations. Some were young, barely out of the academy. Others were veterans like herself, scarred by years of service and humanity's push toward the stars. All of them understood what they were hearing. We offer you terms, the alien voice continued. Surrender your military assets, dismantle your orbital defenses, submit your governance to Vraxian oversight. In exchange, your species will be preserved as a client state. Within the Empire, you will be permitted to exist under our protection and guidance. This is the only path to survival. Sarah's jaw tightened. The arrogance in those words was staggering. The Vraxian spoke as though Earth's surrender was inevitable, merely a formality to be completed before moving on to their next conquest. You have 24 Earth hours to transmit your acceptance. Kelratha's message concluded. Resistance will be met with complete annihilation. We have ended civilizations older and more advanced than yours. Do not force us to add humanity to that list. The transmission ended. Silence flooded the command center like cold water. Sarah handed the data pad back to Webb and turned to face her command staff, 12 senior officers representing every branch of Earth's military and scientific establishment. They looked to her for answers. She did not have status of our colonies. Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the ice forming in her chest. Commander James Park, head of communications, shook his head. All silent. Admiral, Mars colony, Europa station, Titan base, even the mining outposts in the belt. We are receiving no signals from any human installation beyond Earth orbit. The Vraxians have blanketed the system with some kind of jamming field. Sarah nodded. Slowly isolate the enemy before striking. Classic military doctrine, and the Vraxians were executing it. Perfectly, by cutting Earth off from its colonies, they had severed humanity's ability to coordinate a system-wide defense. Each human outpost was now alone, vulnerable, waiting to see if Earth would save them or abandon them. Fleet status. Sarah turned to Admiral Victor Clove, commander of Earth's Orbital Defense Forces, Clove's expression was grim. We have 42 warships in defensive formation around Earth. Another 16 are scattered across the inner system, but with communications down, we cannot coordinate with them. Against the Vraxian fleet, he trailed off, but the math was simple enough. Humanity was outnumbered more than 50-1. The room fell silent again. Sarah walked to the transparent wall that overlooked Earth from the command station's orbital position. The planet turned below, blue and white and heartbreakingly fragile. 7 billion people lived down there, unaware that their entire species stood on the edge of extinction. Cities glowed like scattered jewels across the night side. Somewhere down there, her daughter was sleeping in her apartment in Seattle, dreaming of whatever young artist dreamed about. Sarah had not spoken to her in 3 weeks. There had always been time. Later, Admiral, a quiet voice spoke. Behind her, it was Dr. Elizabeth Ockey, Earth's chief sinology advisor. The woman had spent her entire career preparing humanity for first contact with alien life. Sarah suspected she had never imagined it would come like this. There is something you should know. Something that was kept classified above your clearance level until now. Sarah turned, one eyebrow raised. Above my clearance, Doctor, I command Earth's entire defensive fleet. Elizabeth nodded, her dark eyes serious. This goes back further than your command, Admiral. Further than anyone currently serving. It is called the Archival Protocol, and it was established 73 years ago by the founders of the United Earth Government. They anticipated this exact scenario. Around the room, officers leaned forward. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. What kind of protocol? A contingency, Elizabeth said carefully. A final option. If humanity ever faced an enemy too powerful to defeat through conventional means. The protocol was designed not to win a war, but to prevent one from ever being fought, explained. Sarah demanded. Elizabeth glanced at the other officers, then back to Sarah. The founders believed that if humanity ever encountered a hostile alien species with superior technology, our only chance of survival would be deterrence, not military deterrence, but psychological deterrence. They created an archive, a comprehensive database containing the complete history of human warfare, every conflict, every weapon, every tactical innovation, every act of brutality, sacrifice, and relentless determination that has characterized our species since we first learned to throw stones at each other. Sarah stared at her. Our war history, that is the great secret. Weapon, not a weapon, Admiral. Warning. Elizabeth stepped closer, her voice dropping. The founders theorized that any species advanced enough to reach Earth would have achieved some level of stability, some peace within their own civilization. They would have moved beyond constant warfare. But humans, she paused, humans have never stopped fighting, not for 10,000 years. We have turned war into an art form, a science, a religion. We have built weapons capable of ending all life on our planet and come within minutes of using them. We have fought ourselves with more creativity, more viciousness, and more persistence than any species should be capable of. Understanding began to dawn in Sarah's mind. She looked back at the tactical display at the red markers representing the Vraxian fleet. You want to show them what we are? I want to show them what we could become, Elizabeth corrected. If they invade Earth, they will not be fighting a peaceful species defending its home. They will be fighting a species that has been perfecting the art of war since before we discovered fire. They will inherit an enemy that never forgives, never forgets, and never stops. And that enemy will have access to all the Vraxian technology they capture from the invasion. Sarah felt a cold smile touch her lips. The elegance of it was terrifying. The Vraxians had come expecting easy conquest, another primitive species to absorb into their empire. Instead, they would receive a history lesson. She turned to her communications officer, Commander Park. Prepare to transmit the archival protocol to the Vraxian flagship. Full data package, complete historical record. Send it with one message. This is what we have done to ourselves. Imagine what we will do to you. Park hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Yes, Admiral. Sarah looked around the command center one last time. 24 hours until the ultimatum expired. 24 hours for the Vraxians to read humanity's darkest chapters and decide if Earth was truly a prize worth claiming. Send a message, she ordered. The transmission began, carrying with it the weight of 10,000 years of human conflict launched into the void toward an alien fleet that had no idea what they were about to receive. The message that changed everything. Warm Master Raster Kell stood in the command sanctum of the Vraxian flagship Eternal Dominion, his scaled hands clasped behind his back as he observed the primitive human world through the viewport. Earth hung in the distance, blue sphere wrapped in white clouds, utterly defenseless against the might of his fleet in his 200 cycles of service to the Vraxian Empire. He had overseen the incorporation of 17 species. This would be the 18th. The humans had 12 hours remaining to accept their surrender terms. Kilrod expected compliance. They always complied eventually. The alternative was extinction, and even the most stubborn species possessed survival instincts. Warm Master, his communications officer, called out, her voice carrying a note of confusion. We are receiving a transmission from the human home world. It is not a surrender declaration. Kilro turned his crystal in as narrowing. What is it then? A data package. Warm Master. Approximately 900 terabytes of information. They have included a brief message. The translation reads, "This is what we have done to ourselves. What we will do to you." Silence fell across the command sanctum. Kilrod's senior officers exchanged uncertain glances. In all their conquests, no species had responded to Vraxian ultimatum with such words. Sits were meaningless from those who lacked the power to enforce them. Get something in the phrasing. Troubled Kroth. The humans were not threatening violence. They were promising it. Display the package contents. Kroth order. The central holographic projector activated, and data began to stream across the air. And glowing columns, file directories, historical records, technical estimatics, combat footage, medical reports, archaeological data. The sheer volume was staggering. Kelroth stepped closer, studying the organization of the fowls. It appears to be a complete military history of their species. His intelligence officer reported, his voice uncertain, dating back thousands of their years. War Master, they have cataloged every armed conflict their civilization has ever engaged in. Kilrow felt something cold settle in his chest. They had studied many species before conquest. Most had histories of occasional conflict, territorial disputes resolved through limited warfare. It was the natural order of evolution. But 900 terabytes. That suggested something else entirely. Begin analysis, Croth commanded. I want to understand what these primitives think they are showing us. He officers moved to their stations, and the Vraxian fleet's most advanced analytical systems began processing the human data, waiting minutes. The first reports emerged. Kelro listened as his officers read them aloud, their voices growing progressively more disturbed. Warm Master, the humans have been in a state of continuous warfare for their entire recorded history. There has not been a single year in the past 3,000 cycles where some portion of their species was not actively engaged in armed conflict with another portion. Kelro scaled brow. Impossible. No species could sustain that level of internal violence and still achieve space capability. The data is extensive and cross-referenced. Warm Master, they document wars lasting hundreds of years, conflicts that consumed entire continents, weapons development programs that span generations. The officer paused, pulling up a specific file. Warm Master, they have a designated category called Total War. It refers to conflicts where entire civilizations mobilized every resource toward the complete destruction of their enemies. Show me, Croth said quietly. The holographic display shifted, showing archived footage from human history. Kilrow watched as primitive human aircraft dropped bombs on cities, reducing them to rubble. Saw armies numbering in the millions clash across frozen wastelands. Observed naval vessels sinking beneath dark waves, carrying thousands to their death. The scale of destruction was incomprehensible. This were not limited engagements between professional warriors. This were entire populations dedicated to mutual annihilation. Access their weapons development records, Kelroth ordered, his voice tight. The display changed again. Technical schematics filled the air, showing the evolution of human weaponry. Kilroth's officers fell silent as they processed what they were seeing. The progression was horrifying in its creativity. Humans have developed chemical weapons designed to melt flesh from bone, biochemical agents engineered to spread plague, incendiary devices that turned cities into furnaces. And then, inevitably, they had discovered atomic fission. Warm Master, his science officer whispered, they built weapons capable of destroying their own planet. Multiple nations possessed them simultaneously. According to their records, they came within minutes of using them on numerous occasions. Kilrow stared at the data. The Braxian Empire had never developed such weapons. There had never been a need. Braxian society had achieved unity through philosophy and reason, not through the threat of species-wide extinction. But humans had built world-ending arsenals and pointed them at themselves. Why? Kilrow asked, though he knew no one in the command sanctum could answer. Why? Would a species create the means of its own destruction? His intelligence officer pulled up another foul. Warm Master, there is a section on human military doctrine. 1. Concept appears repeatedly across different eras and cultures. They call it mutually assured destruction. They theory that if both sides possess the capability to annihilate each other, neither will initiate conflict. They held themselves hostage, Kelroth said, slowly their own species. For generations, War Master. And according to the historical records, it worked. The largest human nations avoided direct warfare with each other for nearly a century because of this doctrine. Kelroth turned back to the viewport, looking at Earth with new eyes. Had assumed the humans were primitive because they had only recently achieved space flight. Had measured them by technological advancement and found them lacking, but he had not considered their psychology. Had not imagined a species that would threaten itself with extinction as a form of peacekeeping. Continue the analysis, Kelroth order. I want to understand their tactical evolution. For the next 6 hours, Kelroth and his officers immersed themselves in the human archive. They studied battles from every era of human history. They observed how humans adapted to new weapons, new terrains, new enemies. The patterns that emerged were deeply disturbing. Humans did not fight wars to achieve limited objectives. They fought to win regardless of cost. When conventional tactics failed, they innovated. When resources ran low, they improvised. When defeat seemed certain, they became more dangerous, not less. The archive contained countless examples of human forces fighting to the last soldier, choosing death over surrender. It documented guerrilla campaigns that lasted decades, resistance movements that could not be extinguished, insurgencies that bled empires dry. Warm Master, his strategic officer spoke, her voice shaken. I have been analyzing their tactical responses to superior enemies. There is a consistent pattern. When humans face an opponent with better technology or greater numbers, they do not surrender. They change the nature of the conflict. They employ scorched earth tactics, destroying resources to deny them to the enemy. They launch asymmetric warfare campaigns, targeting supply lines and command structures. They weaponize their own infrastructure, turning cities into death traps where Master, they make conquests so costly that victory becomes meaningless. Kelroth absorbed this information in silence. The Vraxian Empire had conquered 17 species, but none had been like this. The others had possessed honor, ratality, a sense of proportional response. But humans appeared to lack these restraints. They fought with a desperation that suggested they saw every conflict as existential. Access their cultural records, Croth said. I want to understand how they view warfare. War Master, his second in command, spoke quietly. If we invade Earth, we will win the initial battle. Our technology is superior, but we will inherit an enemy that has been training for this moment for millennia, an enemy that has already demonstrated its willingness to use weapons of planetary destruction, an enemy that views surrender as worse than death. Kelroth looked at the data one final time. The humans had sent them 900 terabytes, but the message was simple. We have done all of this to ourselves. We have survived it. We have learned from it, and if you force us to fight we will use every lesson we have learned. He thought of the 17 species the Vraxian Empire had conquered. All had possessed some military capability. All had resisted to some degree, but all had eventually seen reason and accepted peace under Vraxian rule. The humans had spent their entire history refusing to see reason, refusing to accept the inevitable, refusing to surrender even when surrender was the logical choice. Prepare a fleet-wide transmission, Kelroth said, his voice heavy with a decision he had never expected to make. We are withdrawing from the system. His officers stared at him in shock. War. Master, we have overwhelming force. We can end their civilization in days. Yes. Croth agreed, but we cannot end their will to fight, and that will follow us. Across the stars, he turned to face his command staff. The humans have shown us what they are. A species that has fought itself with more brutality than we have ever shown any enemy. A species that has brought itself to the edge of extinction and pulled back only to prepare for the next war. If we conquer Earth, we will not gain a client state, we will gain an eternal enemy that will never stop seeking revenge. He walked to the communications console himself. Send a message to the human admiral. Tell her that the Vraxian Empire recognizes Earth as sovereign territory. Tell her that we will not return. He paused, then added words he had never spoken to any species. Tell her that we will not awaken this sleeping beast. The transmission was set. Across the Vraxian fleet, ships began powering their faster than light drives. Within the hour, the entire armada had vanished from human space, leaving Earth untouched. In Earth Defense Command, Admiral Sarah Chen watched the red markers disappear from her tactical display one by one. Around her, officers erupted in cheers and tears of relief, but Sarah simply nodded, slowly understanding what had just occurred. Humanity had won its first interstellar war without firing a single shot. They had won because they had shown the truth of what they were. Species too dangerous to conquer, too relentless to defeat, too willing to embrace destruction to ever be truly subdued. She looked down at Earth, still blue and beautiful and fragile, and whispered a quiet prayer that humanity would never have to prove those truths in actual combat, because the archive they had sent was not a bluff, was a promise.